Hello, my name is Abby Francisco, and this is my Psychological Factors in Collegiate Soccer Players presentation. My target population, as previously mentioned, is collegiate soccer players. Now, I used to be a former collegiate soccer player for San Diego State University, so I think that I'm pretty well able to empathize and sympathize with what this population feels on the field. Currently, I'm an athletic trainer for a community college, and men and women soccer is a team that I work very closely with. I'm at their practices, at all of their games, and I help with I do their injury rehabilitation and return to play. Soccer is a very highly competitive sport. It requires a lot of cardio, patience, quick thinking. It's a game of fast and slow bouts, a lot of mental toughness that we'll go into throughout this presentation, and of course, injury rehabilitation and recovery. So I found a few articles that I thought were very applicable to collegiate soccer players, one of which being done by Thelwell, Weston, and Greenlees, and it's titled Defining and Understanding Mental Toughness Within Soccer. So they defined mental toughness as having a natural developed psychological edge, enabling better coping mechanisms with the demands that soccer brings to soccer players. They also defined it as being more consistent and better than of their opponents in determination, focus, confidence, and control under pressure. Of course, having mental toughness also has to do with the past experience and varying environments that soccer players have dealt with throughout their developmental years. So whether they have had positive or negative experience, and the environments that they have been in really can affect that mental toughness and their coping mechanisms and that focus that we mentioned earlier. Another article is by Gilham and Weiler. It's titled Goal Setting Within a College Soccer Team, What Went Right and Less Than Right. Now, this article, this study looked at a female collegiate soccer team and focused on 3 levels of goals: athlete goals, position group goals, and team goals. And some positives, so what went right, were actually observed by the starting lineup. So 11 players that you put on the field first to gain that edge. And this goal setting really contributed to team wins. And additionally, the coaches made better improvements to game time decisions because these players weren't seeking immediate feedback. They kind of did that in their goal setting time. Now, some negatives, what went less than right was the individual goals pertaining to evaluation and feedback. So each individual player, when they express their goals, may not have been as receptive to the feedback of those goals or the evaluation, whether they met them or not. And the last article was predictors of sources of self-confidence in collegiate athletes. I actually think that this was a huge one, as self-confidence really affects performance on the field and that psychological and cognitive aspect to the game. Now, the article looked at potential antecedents of sources of confidence. So what they found as a predictor of a source of confidence were these characteristics in soccer players or collegiate athletes, which were perfectionism, achievement goal orientation, and coach-induced motivational climate. Now, the sources that they found that were highly rated in terms of self-confidence were social support, mastery, physical and mental preparation sources, coaches' leadership, and demonstration of ability. So this really ties into collegiate soccer, because if you notice some of these characteristics in some of your athletes or the soccer players, you can predict that they might have these sources of self-confidence. On the other hand, if you don't notice those characteristics, then you can talk to a coach or work with the athlete in terms of, how you're coaching your athlete, what's your social support like, why aren't you displaying these characteristics, or rather, let's start to display them. So some factors that affect the motivation and performance of collegiate soccer players are one being physical environment. So as a collegiate soccer player, they do have to deal with the stress of having a full class load, at least 12 units typically, on top of a practice and game schedule. So this can be kind of overwhelming for a young individual, as collegiate players are typically between the ages of 17 and 22. Now, at the community college setting, there are no scholarships, housing, or meal plans. So this can add a lot of stress because a lot of these athletes, and not just community college, but a lot of athletes may have to be financially independent. So not only do you have this class load and game load and practice load, but you also have a work schedule on top of that. So this can add to some stress, definitely some burnout and anxiety. So these are kind of negative influences of the physical environment. Of course, there are ways that we'll discuss later to kind of combat or prevent the overwhelming aspect of a physical environment for a collegiate soccer player. Now, there's also this social environment. As college players, they are social beings. Again, they're young. So on a team, you do have some team bonding, which is great because it's a very positive factor, as it has a lot of motivation for fitness and skill improvement. If you are friends with someone on your team and you see them improve, you'd like to improve with them. Additionally, social support is a huge factor in facilitating recovery from illness and injury, and that's from an article from Yang in 2010, and I've seen this a lot in my own clinic. There is a protective factor reducing distress post-injury, and it for sure also improves motivation during rehab. I typically, if I have two athletes who have the same injury, I'll have them work together. It creates this fun environment, and rehab isn't as taxing or painful or boring as one might anticipate. And lastly, family culture. So I think family can be a positive or a negative thing in terms of motivation. Positive being if your family's there during your games, maybe even your practices, that they're supporting you through the ups and the downs. That's a really good positive enforcement for support. It'll reinforce you to do better and improve in your performance aspect. It can, on the other hand, it can also be a negative thing, as family pressures can really put some stress on you to succeed, especially if your family is counting on you to go far and support that family. If you're kind of the backbone of that family, then it can be a negative thing and cause a lot of stress and anxiety. On the other hand, there are friendships, of course, created with a team. And Watson noted in his article that your team can become a support group, much like your family, especially if you are out of state or international. Your team becomes sort of your family, and you, as a team, share similar struggles and experiences that would combat social isolation from the rest of campus, who may not experience as much athletic or sports stress as you do. So some barriers to psychological growth. One that I've seen a lot with my student athletes are a lack of academic motivation. Now, if your sport is your main priority, typically, or not typically, but sometimes these athletes don't go to school or they don't prioritize school. As a student athlete, you have to maintain a certain GPA, and if they slip, you become ineligible to participate, as your units won't count. And this becomes a vicious cycle. Okay, I don't have the grades and I'm ineligible. Now I can't play. If I can't play, why should I try? So this becomes a huge, you'll start to see a decline in performance, skill, motivation, reinforcement of kind of that success factor. So your solution would be to refer tutors. And one thing that I've seen have a tremendous success is a coach will hold mandatory team study sessions once or twice a week. They have to sign in, and that way you know that your student athletes, because they're students first, kind of maintain their academia. Another barrier is the socioeconomic status. Collegiate athletes come from everywhere around the world, around the country, around the state or city. Some may not have the same economic status. Eating out with the team a lot becomes a very common thing, as it's a very social aspect. Additionally, you have equipment, your cleats. Cleats can be very expensive. Now, those who may not have the financial means may start to feel a little bit left out or excluded. So a solution to this would be team potlucks, impressing your teammates through sheer skill rather than expensive equipment, and inexpensive team bonding experiences like hiking or doing on-campus events that are at reduced price or free to students. So some factors affecting health and performance. One would be an external pressure, which we kind of touched on before. Coaches, teammates, the school itself, family, fans can all provide a lot of pressure to a student athlete, and this can manifest into some internal pressures as an athlete, a soccer player might internalize those expectations. And this can be very stressful, can take a toll on how the athlete perceives their self-efficacy and their self-confidence level. Some ways to overcome this are to prioritize personal goals, to encourage focus, self-awareness, and skill improvement. That's taken from Beer and Morgan, an article from Beer and Morgan. As you can always educate a soccer player on stress management techniques and coping mechanisms for those pressures. Another factor is injury. Of course, because soccer is high impact and collision, injuries can be mild or they can be season-ending, catastrophic, and affect your status on the team, self-confidence, maybe even a scholarship. So some strategies to overcome this are really emphasizing the importance of rest, recovery, and rehab. Rehab is early and often. We want to kind of nip that in the bud if it's mild, and we want to get started soon. As an athletic trainer, it's super important to build confidence during rehabilitation in the clinic. That fear factor, going back to play after injury, is huge. So you have to build that confidence and make sure they know that if you can do it in here, you can do it out there. Another factor is time management. So again, touching on that full course load, meetings, practice, and games, time management is paramount in this sense. It can often be overwhelming and lead to burnout, and that's taken from an article by Rubin and Moses. So some strategies to overcome this are team bonding events across athletic departments to kind of introduce yourself to the rest of the entire athletic department, not just your team. You can kind of emphasize with the rest of these student athletes can emphasize with what you're dealing with and kind of manage your time together. It's also important to educate students to athletes on time management and coping skills so that overwhelmingness doesn't seem so overbearing and we can prevent burnout. And lastly, we have incentive and motivation. And I've seen this a lot. If a team isn't particularly successful, you don't have a good winning streak, athletes tend to lose interest and their performance declines. They start thinking, well, I'm trying to get to the next level. I'm thinking about me and my stats instead of a team. So some strategies to overcome this is to remind athletes, why are you here? Why did you love the game? Why did you fall in love with it? And this is a team sport. Soccer is a team sport. Another way is to set team goals as well as individual goals and see how they may overlap or lead to one another. If you set these individual goals for yourself, that might be the driving factor in meeting your team goals. Mission statement or the biblical reference I found was, "Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up." And that struck a good chord because as an athletic trainer, it's often a thankless job. And you don't want to be weary of helping and improving these athletes. So, just a reminder not to give up and keep doing good for the good of the athlete. And in this class, I learned a lot about the psychological aspect of healing, and I typically deal with the physical. And I've seen, and it was kind of, during the course of this class, working with my athletes, that's a huge part of coming back, gaining confidence, gaining that autonomy, self-efficacy, and improving in performance. On the other hand, I noticed that there are huge barriers to success and things that will prevent people from gaining that growth. And through this class, I learned ways to prevent that. Here are my references. Thank you.